It has been 5 days since everything happened. I don't know what my fate will be, but I hope that by transcribing my story here on these ragged scraps of paper, I can preserve some of the experiences I've gone through and make sure that I am not forgotten. Please take the time to listen. I do not want to die alone. It was on Monday. The sun had just peeked over the peaks of the neighboring mountain range when I awoke. I groaned and rubbed my eyes for a few minutes and then swung my legs over the edge of the bed. At first, I couldn't fathom what I felt. The floor seemed to be covered in a slick sheen of snail slime. I blinked again and looked down. Ice had spread out from under my bed, creeping further under my bedroom door. When I investigated, I found that it had spread all the way to the bathroom 4 doors down the hall. I was confused, but less shocked than you might think. I live in an old Victorian house, and it's drafty as a cave and impossible to keep warm. I figured that last night there had been a dew from the mold in the floor, and it had simply frozen over. I remember thinking that it must have been awfully cold to have managed to freeze inside the house. The incident quickly fading in my mind, I went about my uneventful daily business. At work, the waitress and customers were all talking about how cold it had been. I enthusiastically joined in on the small talk. Nothing more was too notable until the end of the day, when I had gotten home from work and sat drowsily in my chair in front of the fireplace. I turned on the radio. I remember little of the broadcast, but the scraps that I heard still echo in my head as the beginning of the end. The reporter said that Washington was going to have a cold snap, and that we should all stock up on wood and stay indoors. He also mentioned something about a bombing run in China killing hundreds of civilians. I went to bed soon after. Tuesday was much worse. The ice had spread from the bathroom to the living room, and I bashed my knee more than once on the icy stairs. I took to carrying around a cane just in case. The radio broadcast said that it might be a blizzard moving in, but the pattern of the storm seemed to be almost living, as though the cold was moving like an animal. China was mobilizing against the US, but they said not to worry. The reports of nuclear missiles were just propaganda. The other people in the town began to get irritable. All tourism ceased. The roads were declared unfit to drive on. That night, the wind hit. Several of my downstairs windows shattered, and my fire blew out. As I lay in bed, horrible headaches hit me, and I remember huddling in my sheets, sweating and shivering, hoping that this cold front would blow out quickly. Then Wednesday was calm. The wind had stopped completely, and we soon knew why. Huge walls of snow rose over the town. We couldn't be sure of their exact size, but they blotted out the mountains and the sun didn't rise until about 10 a.m. Vague vibrations could be heard in the distance, like large footsteps. A loud chattering noise, like thousands of monkeys, could be heard. Most people dismissed it as the icy peaks melting and breaking, but I was unconvinced. This was the day the power went out. At first it was chaos, a panic that spread quickly and was silenced just as fast. We got organized and rationed out food and blankets. Generators quickly became more important than cars, gas more important than gold. I retreated to my old Victorian home again. Outside gave me headaches. This was a long day. You would think that the sun would go down before 3 p.m. considering the ring of snow, but it seemed to hang in the sky, taunting us with unrelenting heat that did nothing to melt the snow. The radio no longer worked. The giant walls of snow probably blocked the signal. Most of the others started scouting the walls, hoping to find a low place or a way out. I stayed at home. The headaches had gotten worse, and I couldn't stand up without getting dizzy and falling back into bed. After some time had passed, a boy ran back into town, screaming in excitement. In the babble, I overheard that they had found a cave, and it led all the way through the walls of the snow. Shortly after, I heard a great commotion. Children crying, mothers hushing, men calling out to each other. It immediately became obvious that they were leaving at once. I just lay there in bed, unnoticed by all. I couldn't make anything louder than a tortured wheeze without blacking out for a few minutes from the pain. I thought that I would die, and I began praying for release. I now could no longer see. The headaches blocked out the world and painted everything in black relief. After 3 or so hours, and after a rigorous course of painkillers, the headaches faded enough for me to leave the house. All was deadly quiet. Shovels lay in the snow and scraps of cloth lay everywhere. At first, I thought it was from a hasty escape, but then I realized the rocks I saw everywhere were actually bodies. It looked like there had been a mighty battle. The snow mashed and flattened all up and down the street. How it had managed to pass without a single sound escaped me at the time. I retreated to my home, suddenly terrified of the outdoors. Thursday was pure terror. Many people described their descent into madness as a slow crawl. Mine was instant. I knew something had happened to my fellow townspeople, and I didn't want the same unknown fate to happen to me. I boarded up all of my windows. I locked all my doors. I put out my fire and hid all the food. I huddled in a corner with a blanket, using ice to lower my only temperature and hide my heat signature from them. It seems extreme now that I look back, but I was possessed with a mania, and my only coherent thought was I must not be found. I repeated it over and over in my head, driving me to even more extreme lengths. More ice. Douse the floors in gas and hide the scent. Draw them off with blood-soaked rags. They must not find me. They must not find me. That was my only state of existence that whole day. The booming footsteps were much, much louder, and seemed to thump in time with my heartbeat, pounding in my ears like rushing blood. I could smell smoke throughout the whole day, but no fire was to be found. That night, however, I felt suddenly safe and bold. The footsteps had stopped, and the smoke had been blown away by the wind. Instead of staying in my hiding spot, I walked the streets like a zombie, half-open eyes scanning the horizon. I couldn't see much because of the huge walls, but I could make out the faint outline of the stars. They seemed to be burning green and yellow and red, rather than their usual bright white light. I suddenly snapped out of my trance and came back to my own state of mind. I looked in horror at my body, black with cold and emaciated. I stumbled into the nearest building, the grocery store. After raiding the shelves for food, I stumbled into the back room, pulled up a burlap sack, and slept. Friday was the day of my escape. At 3 in the morning, I woke up. I pulled on anything warm I could find and grabbed a shovel from the back room. As I walked through the town, I realized how intact it had been left. As I walked through the quiet and cold, it's almost like I could have been an early morning hiker. The people could have been inside, sleeping in their beds. The idea had grown in my head until I had to stop and check one of the houses to make sure that I had not just gone insane again. It was abandoned, but in perfect condition. I sighed and resumed my journey. As I got closer to the wall, a cold wind sprung up, chilling me. My feet were already blocks of ice, but this bit deeper than ever. I staggered but kept going. As I kept going, the wind got stronger and stronger. My hand dimmed before my eyes, and I realized it was growing darker by the minute. As I came within 10 feet of the wall, a dreadful howling filled my ears, piercing my eardrums. The rest of the 10 feet I covered in a controlled fall, collapsing against the side of the mound. The howling was making me dizzier, and my headache was flaring up again. Gravity seemed to be steadily increasing, and I realized that my strength was failing. I lifted my shovel, struggling against the multitude of forces begging me not to. The wind whipped faster, trying to yank the shovel from my hands. I put the remnant of my strength into bringing it down. If I couldn't at least hit the mound of snow once, I would be defeated. Then the shovel struck the snow and bit deep into the side. The howling abruptly stopped. All was silent. I blinked cold from my eyes and looked down in confusion at the shovel. Black ooze was trickling from the snow mound. Then, the vibration started. A deep humming once again attacked my poor head, quickly moving up the range of sounds until it became nothing but shrill whines. Then the snow began to move. Not just a little here and there, but the entire snow mound all at once lifted away from the ground faster than a plane, faster than I could comprehend. Before me, still bleeding, the shovel still embedded in its side, a huge white worm towered over me. It had a mouth that yawned wider than the biggest cave. It began moving its head back and forth, slowly, as though picking up signals from the air. It opened its huge maw, which I blearily noticed was filled with teeth like rocks and glass, and it dove for me. The sheer weight of the creature was palpable through the air as it rushed toward me. I could barely breathe. The air was being forced back in my lungs by the pressure. I turned and dug deep into myself. I dove, legs collapsing for the final time, snow snapping like frosted glass under my weight. The worm struck the ground with a thunderous sound, so loud that my eardrums finally gave up and blew, flesh ripping like a sail in a storm. My screams fell on deaf ears. The worm began to disappear into the ground, the walls around the city uncoiling and following the head down the hole. I realized it hadn't even noticed me, merely prepared to dive underground. I lay there, staring, as the clouds turned white again, and the snow became slush. I watched as the city was once again revealed. I gazed into the new horizon, at the surrounding land. Once green and lush, they now seemed to be scorched and burnt. Not more than a mile off, where a farm had once stood, a blackened crater was now there. I idly wondered as I lay, waiting for my body to finally stop fighting for life. What had been worse, the worm or the war? Then my neck gave out, and I knew no more. I woke up to the sun, still lying on the outskirts of town. I lie here now, transcribing these words, because I can't even muster the strength to drag myself back to my house. Everyone is gone. But even though the sun has melted the snow, the cold remains embedded inside of me, like a blizzard in a bottle. I shiver to remember this week, and I fear death less than I do the thought of being found. But I don't want to go unheard, my story wasted on my cold lips. I do not want to pass into that light forgotten. Nobody wants to die alone. This has been Chilling Cold, written by Anonymous, narrated by Red Meyer. Thanks for listening to tonight's story. If you enjoyed what you heard, be sure to subscribe to hear more. Until next time, sleep well.